On a visit to Santiago in Chile, Camilla Parker Bowles, hunter of foxes and mistress of the Prince of Wales, found that she had unexpectedly become the quarry. It was a predicament well known to her late rival, Princess Diana. She was hounded and harassed wherever she went.
Come on, get lost.
Diana would pay a terrible price for her fame. Now the tables are turned. 6,000 miles from home, Camilla finds that she is now the center of attention. Diana manipulated the press, but often resented unwelcome attention. For the pursued, the thrill of the chase soon lost its attraction. On holiday, Diana often needed help from officials to throw off the press.
Out. O-U-T, out.
Have a nice trip, ma'am.
A few years later, Camilla too needed VIP protection. Camilla secretly visited her old friend Lucia Santa Cruz. Lucia introduced her to Prince Charles in the early 70s, and thus began a tantalizing saga of love and betrayal. Highgrove, country home of the Prince of Wales. In July 1997, it was the setting for a lavish 50th birthday party for Camilla. Such an honour exposed her to a new level of public scrutiny.
I shouldn't think Prince Charles got the slightest clue what it could possibly be like to be Camilla. How could he? The whole rarefied way in which he was brought up, the rarefied way in which he lives.
In 1992, Camilla was revealed as Charles's mistress in a shattering book written by Andrew Morton, to whom Diana had dictated the story of her unhappy marriage. Following publication, Camilla was invited into the royal fold at a polo match. But Camilla became the most reviled woman in Britain.
Camilla has a thankless role to play. It's one has to have huge sympathy for this woman, because she's always going to bask in Diana's shadow. She's always going to be seen as the wicked stepmother figure of fairy tales. Therefore, that's a very, very difficult image to change when you come to public acceptance.
Charles met Camilla at a polo match when they were both single. Polo, a sport for the wealthy, had an appeal for seductive girls, as well as for officers and gentlemen. Charles would fill in his diary with polo fixtures before his public duties. He enjoyed the physical thrill of the game. It was the perfect social environment for a prince used to having his own way, until the tragedy of his divorce and Diana's death forced him to review his life.
What has changed Charles fundamentally, actually, is Diana's death. I think he is an enormously changed man. I think that's thrown him into an incredible state of the soul. I mean, he's analysing the mistakes he's made, he's taking on the grief of his sons, he's feeling all the guilt about what he did. That's huge baggage.
The birth of their sons, William in 1982 and Harry 2 years later, added the demands of parenthood to a failing marriage. Shortly after this Mallorcan holiday with the Spanish royal family in 1986, Charles went off alone to Balmoral and to his mistress Camilla. Keeping up the false image of a happy family placed a great strain on Diana. In 1987, they were apart for 3 months. Charles ignored press reports until the Queen intervened. He blamed the chill in the marriage on Diana's illness.
That was Charles's great downfall, was the belief that he could actually put out one view of his character, that this was the man who was the loving, caring man nursing the wife through a very difficult period of time, when in fact the truth was totally different, and he actually believed that he could get away with it.
Diana was told to conceal the marriage rift for the sake of Queen and country. Charles too pretended all was well.
I'm quite sure that, as in the past has happened, and this is a history of the royal family going back 200-300 years, that the prince was expected to have a mistress. What happened, I think, with Diana was that she said, no, to hell with this, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to lay down under Camilla, or indeed lay down under Charles. But I'm going to be somebody who's my own woman, and if he's going to do that sort of thing, I'm going to fight back. Quite right too.
My father was at that house.
In 1990, on their first royal visit to Hungary, recently liberated from communism, Diana was already contemplating revenge against her husband.
After the MORTON book, where Diana had expressed her worries about the relationship of Charles and Camilla, that he knew perfectly well that all the panists, spin doctors, had been saying that there wasn't anything at all and this was all part of Diana's fantasy. Well, they couldn't possibly have said that without his knowledge and approval. For him then to come out and say he had done, it was more than hypocrisy. I mean, it was an inhuman thing to say about your wife, who clearly was under very considerable stress over this marriage. And you just say, well, it's nonsense, she's not very well, you know. It is 300 years of arrogant inbreeding and getting your own way that created that. Because I don't think he's a bad man, but I do think that he's a man who's just been brought up in a tradition which we are no longer prepared to accept as something that is realistic.
Charles believed he was the heir not just to the House of Windsor, but to 1,000 years of monarchy. His position and royal upbringing set him apart. Waiting for the throne isolated him further. His destiny was dictated by a family tradition begun by Queen Victoria and continued by her grandson George V.
What happened, though, in the beginning of the 20th century with George V and Queen Mary was that there was a decision, I think quite deliberately taken by George V, that the monarchy should adapt itself to democracy. What we're going to do, we're going to symbolise the one thing that all our people have in common. Now, the thing that everybody had in common until the 1960s was family. You all belonged to a family, you were a product of a family, you were all going to get married. Very few people didn't get married and so on. And the House of Windsor did this, and it did it extraordinarily successfully. George V and Queen Mary, and later on George VI and Queen Elizabeth, now the Queen Mother, very, very successfully embodied typical middle-class bourgeois family values. It was a bourgeois monarchy.
But some of the children rebelled, notably the eldest son, Edward, the Prince of Wales. He defied his parents' family values with a string of married mistresses. There was Thelma Furness, and Frida Dudley Ward, and Wallis Simpson, for whom he gave up the throne.
Now, there are always exceptions. There was the exception, of course, of Edward VIII, who was driven from the throne because he wouldn't fulfil this particular set of values. He would not fulfill this image of the family monarchy. But the trouble is, you see, once you set yourself that standard, if you then veer from it, you suffer, and you suffer terribly.
Behind a facade of pomp and pageantry, the royal family tried to conceal its internal divisions and the behaviour of its more wayward members.
They might have decided from the 1960s, well, why don't we admit that the family is no longer as powerful a symbol as it used to be? You know, that divorce rates are increasing, there are more broken homes, there are more illegitimate children. Let's sort of shift the image a little bit, and they didn't. What they did instead, they constantly hyped it. They hyped it within the royal family. They hyped it supremely, of course, with the marriage of Charles and Diana.
Their marriage was sold as a fairy tale.
It was perceived to have said, we are morally virtuous. And then its conduct was discovered not to be morally virtuous. And that charge of hypocrisy was thrown at it, and it has stuck, and they will find it very difficult to get rid of it.
Camilla was also following a family tradition of a special type of royal service. Her great-grandmother Alice Keppel had been King Edward's mistress.
She was a very vivacious, very attractive, very charming woman, very sensuous kind of woman. There was Italian blood in her family. And so in a way she caught his eye, and he never really looked back. He was very taken with her. She was the perfect king's mistress. King Edward VII was a very restless, very difficult man. She knew exactly how to handle him. So she was, as I say, the perfect mistress for a king, for a man like him.
Edward VII. You know, the man with so many mistresses that there were allegedly sort of rules as to how the mistress should behave, and one of them sort of explained how a mistress was supposed to behave, that you curtsied first, called him sir, and then jumped into bed. You know, there was actually a sort of court etiquette for the mistress.
In those days, there was no scandal about that kind of thing. The general public didn't know about it at all. If photographs of them appeared in British newspapers, then her face would be airbrushed out. You would see her hat, you would see her dress, but you wouldn't actually see who it was. In that way, the newspapers were very discreet about it.
Alice Keppel played the perfect wife, but rumours surrounded the birth of her second child.
There were two daughters. There was Violet and there was Sonia. And as the second daughter, Sonia, was born after Alice Keppel had met the then Prince of Wales, it's quite likely that he was her father. No one can know this kind of thing for sure, but I think it is more than likely that the future King Edward VII was Sonia Keppel's father.
If true, then Sonia passed on royal blood to her granddaughter Camilla. Born in 1947, the year Alice Keppel died, Camilla was the first child of Sonia's daughter Rosalind and Major Bruce Shand. Unlike Charles, Camilla had a happy childhood with her parents, sister and brother. They lived the charmed life of the country set in their comfortable former rectory, the Lanes, near Lewes in Sussex. Camilla enjoyed ponies, parties and fun in the swimming pool. After attending a local preparatory school, Camilla completed her education at the elite Queensgate School in Kensington. Like many of her classmates, Camilla became a debutante in search of a wealthy and important husband. Her eventual marriage to a courtier would bring her close to the royal circle and especially close to Prince Charles. The Prince of Wales was then a young bachelor searching for a bride. He could not confide in his parents and needed an older and wiser figure to be his soulmate. His great-uncle Lord Mountbatten filled that role. In 1977, Royal Jubilee year, the Queen and Prince Philip were occupied with royal duties. Mountbatten took the opportunity to guide the young prince. Charles often visited Broadlands, Mountbatten's Hampshire home. His granddaughter Amanda Knatchbull was considered a potential royal bride. Davina Sheffield was another of Charles's girlfriends. He was also linked with actress Susan George and the aristocratic Lady Jane Wellesley. There was no shortage of girlfriends, including Sabrina Guinness, but Lady Tryon, Kanga, was a married confidant who became a rival to Camilla. In fact, several married women became involved with Charles, but Camilla occupied a special place in his heart. She was more than a lover, giving him the comfort and warmth he had been denied in childhood. Charles and Camilla began their long affair in October 1972 after an evening out at the exclusive London club Annabelle's in the heart of Mayfair. Camilla was a wealthy girl about town. She enjoyed all the freedom of a young liberated woman of the 60s. She was already experienced with men. One of the most famous romances in history started in an unremarkable block of flats in Stackhouse on Cundy Street, where Camilla lived at the time. At Broadlands, the sophisticated Camilla was enchanted by the immature young prince. Charles, said society diarist Roy Strong, was earnest with a boyish grin and a non-sophisticated sense of humour, prankish, thoughtful, kind and shy. He began a naval career that would complete his formal education and take him away from the girl he loved. He would be thousands of miles from home on the high seas as a serving officer when he heard that Camilla was engaged to Andrew Parker Bowles. They had a high society wedding in July 1973. Camilla had won the most handsome man in her social sphere. Charles feared he had lost her forever.
Really, the big mistake was not to have married her in the first place. That, of course, has been his life all the way through. He's not been able to make up his own mind. He's dallied and dithered, listened to the Duke of Edinburgh. Disaster for anybody, I would have thought. No other human being lives like that, and unfortunately it was his undoing very early on. Should have married her then.
The Parker Bowles lived at Bollyhide Manor in Wiltshire. To be close by, Charles bought Highgrove. Under the cover of royal engagements, Camilla turned up regularly. Charles's relationship with a married woman was acceptable in royal circles. Charles and Camilla also met at Hall Place, the Hampshire home of Camilla's grandmother Sonia, the probable daughter of Edward VII. Enter now Charles's innocent fiancée, Lady Diana Spencer. She knew nothing at first of his secret life. An inexperienced 19-year-old, Diana had accepted Camilla's friendship at face value. No one would tell her the truth. The royal family and her own relatives remained silent about Charles's mistress. As her relationship with Charles progressed, Diana grew suspicious of Camilla's influence over him. Charles left for a pre-arranged tour of Australia shortly after their engagement in 1981. Diana's distress was passed off as the anxiety of a young girl facing the absence of her future husband. However, the awful truth was beginning to intrude on her happiness. Diana had heard Charles take a last-minute phone call from Camilla before they left his office in Buckingham Palace. Knowing that Camilla was in constant contact with Charles, Diana's tears fell as his plane took off. In Australia, Charles and Camilla's calls were bugged. The incident was dismissed as a hoax. But the press was suspicious. When Charles entertained a blonde, assumed to be Diana, on the royal train in sidings near the Parker Bowles home, it made the front page news. There were official denials over Diana's presence. She knew it wasn't her and must have suspected the woman was Camilla. Diana's love for Charles blinded her to reality. And in July 1981, Charles and Diana were married at the wedding of the century. Diana was the most beautiful bride you could ever imagine, said a commentator, but Diana knew Charles's secret. Few noticed the mounted escort, Camilla's husband, Andrew Parker Bowles, head of the Royal Household Cavalry. An officer and a gentleman, his discretion was assured. After 2 nights at Broadlands, Charles's former love nest, the newlyweds honeymooned on Britannia. Charles took with him souvenirs of Camilla.
The time of the honeymoon was both a romantic time, but it was also a time of extreme bitterness and painful memories. There was one occasion on the Royal Yacht Britannia where she opened Charles's diaries and 2 pictures of Camilla fluttered to the floor.
Diana later informed MORTON, her biographer, that she had suffered dreadfully from bulimia on her honeymoon cruise. She blamed Charles's infatuation with his mistress. Diana's obsession with Camilla grew to the point of psychological illness. At Balmoral later that summer, Diana hid her mental state from the cameras. She knew her husband could not give her the love she craved, and that he would always hunger for the woman he could not have.
Prince Charles has a really very interesting chart, because everything you look at in regard to women and relationships says, I want what I can't have. I have this romantic dream, and that I want what's just out of reach. Again, he shares that with a lot of men. He's not very different there. So it may be that had Camilla been the wife, that he would have naturally looked for something that would give him just that extra sense of, if only I could have this person, then my life would be perfect. What is fascinating is that Camilla's sun and her moon, the 2 very key components in an astrological chart, are in exactly the same sign as Diana. So, I mean, you have some very similar connections from chart to chart. So I often felt that had he married Camilla, Diana might have been the great love of his life.
The Queen did not invite Camilla to Balmoral, her home in Scotland. It was left to Charles's grandmother, the Queen Mother, to entertain Camilla and her husband at her home at Birkhall, a convenient location close by for Charles and Camilla to meet. Diana believed that she had allowed a special telephone line to be installed so that Charles could phone Camilla without fear of being bugged. In time, Diana grew to distrust and dislike the Queen Mother. Outwardly, for the Prince and Princess of Wales, the royal show went on. Their dancing displays enchanted Australians, first in 1983, and in 1985 when Diana stunned onlookers by wearing a royal heirloom as a jewelled headband. And again in 1988. Later, Charles returned home to Camilla and the more traditional role of a prince with a mistress.
I think Charles's problem is that he appeared early on to be a very new age, modern man in touch with the values of his own generation. As he's grown older, it's become clearer that he's actually a very traditional royal. And in this department, he's a very traditional royal in that he famously said to Diana, "Do you expect me to be the first Prince of Wales in history not to have a mistress?" when she started kicking up a fuss about Camilla. Diana turned out to be not the brainless bimbo that he thought he'd married, but a thoroughly modern woman who stamped her foot publicly and became a potent icon for feminists suddenly, but also a rather traditional woman in that she wanted a strong family unit with strong family values. He was betraying both those things. And I think as the first Prince of Wales to grow up in the mass media age, the intrusive age, he's not just out of touch with his own times, he always has been, but he's trying to live an impossible contradiction in an age when you just can't get away with that. So I don't think the deception would be any easier now in an age when people openly live with people who are not their wives. Only one of those people wants to be head of the Church of England, that's Prince Charles, and he has to live by those rules.
Before Prince Andrew's wedding to Sarah Ferguson in 1986, Charles dismissed Diana's bodyguard for falling in love with his wife. Yet he and Camilla were having a full-blown affair. Royal rejoicing hid the family's concern. Charles and Diana hardly spoke during the entire wedding celebrations and came out of Buckingham Palace separately to wave off the Yorks. Holding page boy William, Diana knew that Charles was lost to her. Behind the joy for her friend Fergie, now a royal bride, Diana was already consulting astrologer Penny Thornton as she feared for her own future. She suspected Charles met Camilla in France, Spain, Turkey, Switzerland, and in Italy. Florence was where Diana believed Charles and Camilla revisited royal history at her great-grandmother Alice Keppel's secret villa, a gift from King Edward VII. Camilla took art lessons to share Charles's passion for painting. She encouraged him. He took pride in his results. It was an ideal partnership.
Maybe if Charles and Camilla were to go on, not being able to live openly together, but seeing each other most of the time and having periods of absence from each other, they would be able to sustain this very satisfactorily for them both. They would always have this rather romantic, passionate edge to the relationship.
At a birthday party for Camilla's sister held at Ormley Lodge, home of Lady Annabel Goldsmith, Diana confronted her rival.
He expected to go on his own. Diana insisted on coming, and they went in the car together, and she remembers him as being very uncomfortable. And so she confronted Camilla. She asked her about the relationship. Camilla was evasive, and from that moment onwards, all Charles's friends and what she called dismissively the Highgrove set continued to perpetuate this lie that Charles and Camilla were just friends.
In June 1990, the dangers of polo were evident when the prince, an enthusiastic player, fell heavily, sustaining a badly broken arm that needed surgery.
There you go.
Diana continued the charade of the caring wife, visiting her husband in hospital and taking him home to recuperate at Highgrove. Once there, Diana left and Camilla nursed Charles. The broken bone refused to heal and caused Charles such pain that another operation was necessary. A specialist had to reset the injured arm. Camilla secretly visited Charles in hospital.
Keep moving back, please.
Diana spent much of her time at the hospital meeting other patients, but afterwards she repeated the practiced performance of a dutiful wife, aware that the cameras were clicking and the press were covering Charles's departure. Concealing a sham marriage in which Camilla was the third party, they went home. Camilla would enter through Highgrove's gardens the moment Diana had gone. Diana lost her home as well as her husband to Camilla.
I mean, I think a lot of people who not only cared about Diana, but cared about the whole notion of the royal family being able to choose a 19-year-old bride for the future king and have her give birth to his children and then be so unceremoniously dumped and have her heart broken. In some ways, we understand why Prince Charles did what he did. He had to have a wife, he had to have children, he couldn't have the woman he wanted. But she, Camilla, she was, a country housewife, bringing up her children. She's the one who should have stepped aside and said, oh no, I can't do this to this girl. I can't do this, because I'm decent and human, and I can't watch this girl suffering and becoming suicidal and mentally unstable and ruin her life and her children's lives. Camilla's the one who should have stepped aside.
Eventually, servants revealed details of Charles's conduct. Camilla had destroyed the fairy tale.
Royal mistresses are exceedingly unpopular. There have been some popular royal mistresses, but they're very, very rare. Royal mistresses are unpopular first because they're marriage breakers, and certainly most women in a population will always side against somebody who is seen as a marriage breaker.
Diana had an affair with Guards officer James Hewitt over a period of 5 years. She fantasized about breaking free from her marriage, but at that stage it was an impossible dream. There were other loves too, possibly 7 during her lifetime, all hidden beneath a veneer of duty. Diana took her public position seriously. She performed the traditional roles like being Colonel-in-Chief of the Royal Hampshire Regiment with grace and with a smile. She was the ideal choice as Princess of Wales and future Queen. Diana delighted in criticisms of Camilla, who was older, badly groomed and much less attractive than herself.
When you see her in the flesh, she does have something special. She's got strong features. She may not be a conventional beauty. The great endearing thing about her is she doesn't care anyway. She's got a fag on and she's got her hair all funny, like a stabbed sofa look, and then she's got her wellies on.
I mean, one tabloid newspaper recently put a picture of Camilla beside a horse and said, which one would you rather marry? Or which one would you rather go to bed with? She has had to put up with some brutal publicity.
I was in America once and saw a television show where someone described her as looking like a bag full of spanners, which baffled the Americans because they don't have spanners over there. But anyway, she has had to put up with some pretty gross insults about her looks.
I think Charles himself is quite sloppy in his personal habits. He's very bad with paperwork, but of course he has a support system. He has 2 valets paid for by the state to clean up his clothes after him and wash his socks and make sure he's got clean underpants every day and help him get dressed in the mornings. So maybe he quite likes, amid the formal world in which he lives, this kind of informality that she brings to his life.
Charles and Camilla enjoyed secret rendezvous all over Britain. They regularly met at country houses such as Garraby Hall in Yorkshire, home of the Earl of Halifax. Eaton Hall, the Cheshire estate of the Dowager Duchess of Westminster, was another. A familiar retreat was Northmoor, then the Norfolk stud farm of Hugh and Emily Van Cutsum. Close friends protected the couple's privacy. The famously elegant, stately home of the Earl and Countess of Shelburne, Bowood, was a favourite meeting place. Earl Shelburne challenged newspaper reports of their visits to protect Charles.
Psychologically, it's very important to have a group of friends who will see you as a couple and acknowledge you as a couple and give you not just the emotional and psychological support, but also lend perhaps homes and opportunities where everything can be kept in its concealed situation, primarily so as not to upset anyone else. It's not so much deceitful as protective, I think.
Behind the fences of Camilla's home, Middlewick House, Charles was a regular visitor. On one occasion, the press got wind that the heir to the throne was staying over. Huddled under rugs in the back seat of a chauffeur-driven car, Prince of Darkness was forced to experience the indignity of a hasty escape into the night. Impervious to this kind of evidence, Charles's office continued to undermine Diana's credibility.
We were being told that Charles and Diana were trying to get their life back together again. And this was after the Andrew MORTON book had first revealed Diana's worries about Camilla, and before the actual breakup. So they were due to go on a royal tour of Korea. And we were asked to hold off any kind of criticism of Charles and Diana. Meanwhile, the spin doctors at the palace were saying that Charles was trying to help Diana through this very difficult period of time that she was having, and that all this fantasy that she was having about Camilla being Charles's mistress was the problem of her illness and her bulimia. So they were all bad-mouthing her like mad.
A scheduled royal visit to Korea in early November 1992 went ahead, but the tour was a mistake. The couple offended their hosts with their personal animosity towards one another. Quite simply, Charles and Diana could not stand each other's presence.
It was the most disastrous public relations exercise, and it was quite clear that the two loathed each other. I mean, you only had to look at the pictures, and they were called the Glums and all sorts of awful things.
The poisonous atmosphere between the couple meant that they were never allowed to represent Britain abroad again. The rift between them was now beyond repair and disguise.
We decided that the time was to come out and say that this is actually the truth of this relationship, that all the bad-mouthing of Diana and the alleged fantasy of Camilla, she was in fact true, was in fact true, and that she was right, and that the palace were putting out the most terrible smokescreen. No doubt they didn't believe it, but that Charles in fact had been doing all the things that Diana said.
The Mirror newspaper exposed the story of a taped telephone call between Charles and Camilla made in 1989.
Jag tycker du är feeling well on. What is feeling well on you? I can't bear a Sunday night without you. It's like that program Start the Week. I can't start the week without you.
It pretty quickly became clear that this was indeed Charles and Camilla. It was what the person who brought it to us said it was. I thought that it was actually a very good imitation of a caricature of the Prince of Wales, which indeed it was, because he was caricaturing himself.
The couple talked in intimate language and made private jokes that showed Charles had a schoolboy mentality.
I think you're going to come back as a pair of knickers. God forbid a Tampax.
People have not forgotten that appalling thing about wanting to come back as a Tampax. That's going to stick to him, like various aspects of the Monica Lewinsky affair will always stick to Clinton. I think there's a lot of parallels between Charles and the Clinton episode. The President of the United States, like the future king, who's also going to be head of the church, is supposed to and expected to set some kind of moral example. And both of them have suffered enormously on that front. They've both been sorely embarrassed by publication of transcripts of very seamy tapes. In Charles's case, it's something that he's going to find very hard to shed.
Oh, I thought he was so much a Garabay.
Outwardly, nothing changed at Middlewick House, but Camilla's secrets continued to unravel in the press.
It seemed such an invasion of privacy, but it was quite clear that these two had a tremendously sexy and passionate relationship, and that she was able to touch those parts of Charles that perhaps other people hadn't been able to reach, which is his mind, his eroticism, and all that kind of thing. So they clearly have a very, very strong physical, sexual base, and that's a wonderful factor and an enduring factor for a long-term relationship.
Diana feared that she would be divorced against her wishes and lose her children to the royal family. She took the unwise step of going public in a shattering television interview. She confessed to an affair with Major James Hewitt, but blamed Camilla for the breakdown of her marriage. Although Charles had spent a lifetime dictated by duty and ceremony, he too had destroyed the mystique of the monarchy in revelations to his biographer Jonathan Dimbleby, televised in 1994. He admitted adultery with Camilla.
He answered truthfully about the adultery. Now, the immediate reaction was very well done him, this is very brave of him to admit his adultery. It wasn't anything of the sort, because it unleashed all those demons of the lies that had gone before.
In retrospect, Charles's confession of adultery on the Dimbleby programme in 1994 was the biggest mistake he's ever made. It's quite ironic because Diana actually benefited from being honest and making honest confessions, and people loved her for her faults as much as her strengths. When Charles tried the same tactic of being honest, it just rebounded on him hugely. And of course, he didn't think at all about what impact this would have on his own children, let alone the Parker Bowles children. All sorts of people were involved who he didn't think of. That moment, of course, precipitated the eventual divorce between the Parker Bowleses. Andrew Parker Bowles had put up for 20 years with the Prince having an affair with his wife because he thought it was his national duty, I think, to do so. But that was the last straw for him, Charles making this so public. Did he think of Andrew Parker Bowles' reaction when he gave that interview? I don't think so, but the divorce proceedings followed very hard upon.
Although a Catholic, Andrew Parker Bowles remarried soon after his divorce came through. His new wife, Rosemary, enjoys invitations to Royal Ascot and visits to royal homes. Now divorced Camilla, with the help of Charles's good friend Lord Halifax, bought a new country home, Raymill House, 10 miles from Highgrove. Charles redesigned the garden, set in 17 acres. Camilla fell in love with the Wiltshire mansion's ornate rooms, its antique furniture, and the king-size canopied bed. At the time of his divorce in 1996, Charles and Camilla were secretly photographed together at the Welsh home of their friends Nick and Suki Paravicini. The press had been tipped off by a mystery woman. In June 1997, Camilla crashed her car driving to Highgrove to meet Charles. She escaped prosecution, which led to accusations of special treatment because of her status as a royal mistress.
I know that Prince Charles has advised her, which is the same as instructing her, not to read about herself in the newspapers, because if you read about yourself, you're going to get hurt. And that seems typical of their relationship, actually. This is the way we do it, so don't do this, and then you won't have to read that. And I'm sure that she respects that, because she respects most of the things he says.
When Camilla asked the newly engaged Diana if she intended to hunt, the princess suspected that Charles and Camilla secretly met through the hunting fraternity. Camilla is at her best on horseback, showing the humorous side of her personality that Charles loves.
I think the fact that Camilla exudes a kind of quality of friendliness, of ease. I mean, she's prepared to muck in with Charles. She doesn't have tremendous airs and graces. She's coming from the same place as he's coming from. And he feels very comfortable with her.
Through the National Osteoporosis Society, Camilla has found a suitable cause to launch her charitable work.
It's apparent that Camilla, in her own walk of life, is tremendously popular. She does a lot of fundraising, the charities she works with. She's very outgoing and people adore her, so she's very fitted to the role. She could easily carry off an ambassadoress type role, equally as well as Diana.
Not everyone would agree. Diana's ability to empathise with suffering wherever she found it was unique and cannot and should not be imitated. Strangely, Diana seemed to have some sympathy for Camilla once her marriage was over and she was a free woman.
I had lunch with Diana, just the two of us, about 9 months before she died, when she was in more mellow mood about the whole issue of Charles and Camilla. She'd relaxed since the divorce settlement. She wasn't quite as spiky in what she said about Charles. And she wasn't quite as spiky as what she said about Camilla, the famous third person in their marriage. And she said to me, look, why don't they get married? I'm past caring, was how she put it. She wished Charles reasonably well. Why shouldn't he marry Camilla?
These enduring memories of Diana's last campaign against landmines in Sarajevo, just days before her death, have elevated the late princess to a near religious status. But how has her death affected Charles?
A great deal of trouble has been removed from his life, and that's clear. A great deal of trouble, and it was only going to get worse. There was battling over the children, battling for their affections. I mean, Diana was, she was weak in many ways. She was a deeply flawed person. She knew that, and we knew that. And it's ridiculous to make her out to be a saint. She was human, if nothing else.
For several months after Diana's death, Camilla stayed hidden away. Comparisons between the princess and the woman who destroyed her marriage were frequent. In the winter, she and Charles hunted. They were careful not to be photographed together. Aware of public sentiment after Diana's death, Charles and Camilla put on hold their plans to appear in public together. Instead, they weekended at secret locations, such as Llanover in Wales, where they stayed at the secluded leafy estate of Robert Herbert and his wife Philippa.
There has been that element of thrill and secrecy, which is undeniable. I mean, no one who's ever had an affair, a love affair, would deny that there is a thrill in using code names and secret trysts, and it adds to the frisson. Is we can meet on Saturday night and nobody knows but us, and then someone will set apart a magnificent bedroom suite and give them their privacy and tiptoe around them, and there must be a huge element of being terribly special for all these years.
Charles says Camilla is the non-negotiable part of his life. His staff now have to include her when planning his private diary.
There's no doubt at all that he set up this network, and he has plenty of people working for him. He doesn't have to actually make the phone calls himself to say, I'll be down at 2:30 and perhaps you'd like to invite so-and-so to dinner. He's got a whole army of people only too happy to do that for him. And of course, they have grudgingly come to accept Camilla too.
At Beauwood House, she is welcomed by Earl and Countess Shelburne, but some aristocrats put loyalty to the Queen first and avoid Camilla.
Camilla isn't really necessarily the top layer of aristocracy, so it's probably quite tough for her trying to fit in here. I mean, you'll have Prince Charles, who is, of course, the most VIP of them all. Then you'll have this whole layer of squirearchy, which is what he's enjoying their hospitality when he's down here. Where does Camilla fit into that? She's neither one nor the other. She's great on horseback, but around the dinner table, don't know, she hasn't got quite the same breeding.
Since his arm injury, Charles plays less polo, but when he does, everything has to be right for him in recognition of his special status as the Prince of Wales.
Everything has to bend for Charles, and that includes Camilla's wishes and Camilla's life. And there's no doubt that this isn't speculation, I know this, she defers to him. If he's in the room, she will address him as Sir, the same as everyone else. And I don't know about what they get up to in private, although we've had a glimpse of that through the Camilla Gate tape. But I mean, it's clear that he is the Lord and Master. He is the ultimate chauvinist, and she allows him to be that.
Charles knows that the key to the public approval of Camilla as his partner is the acceptance of her by William and Harry. But he is cautious.
Charles kept his sons away from Camilla while Diana was alive for fairly obvious reasons. I think the late princess would have taken a very dim view of her boys cozying up to the woman she regarded as the woman who'd broken up her marriage. It's very difficult, I think, from their point of view. They want their father to be happy, and clearly this is the woman who makes their father happy. At the same time, they must be aware this is also the woman that ruined their mother's life, in her view, and that's going to be very difficult for them to forget.
When Camilla held a party for Charles at Highgrove, William was invited, and so was Harry.
But I think of the two boys, it's probably Harry who feels most unable to meet this woman who he felt made his mother terribly, terribly unhappy. I think William, even though William would appear to be a chip off the old block in the sense of his mother, they had very, very similar characteristics. I think he's of an age where he feels that life changes, life must go on, and that tolerance and acceptance are part of that. I mean, I think he has a more mature attitude.
One of Charles's best-loved sanctuaries is the Glanysg estate in Wales, home of Siân Leg-Burke, lady-in-waiting to Princess Anne. He often visits with William and Harry, but Camilla is currently not accepted at Glanysg and stays nearby with the Herberts at Llanover.
This has always been his safest haven of all. He loves Charlotte Burke and her husband William, and they love having him around, and it's comfortable, it's farmy, it's all the things he loves. There's a river running through it, there's horses, there's shooting, there's everything that he and Harry and little William love.
The Legge-Burke's daughter, Tiggy, is a valued companion to William and Harry. Diana, however, was very jealous of their obvious attachment to her.
Here is this immensely warm and fun-loving and sporty and wonderful girl, effectively taking over Diana's children, the human beings she valued most, the only human beings to ever give her unconditional love.
But Diana's sons have suffered the irreparable loss of their devoted mother before they were grown up. On a visit to Bhutan in 1998, Charles continues his work and to find time for himself and for his hobbies. He hopes that one day the public will accept Camilla as his partner.
She is very, very important in Charles's life. She is the sustaining factor, helping him to deal with his grief over Diana, to help the boys. She is the one strong, stable, emotional factor in his life. And that over a period of time, by a sort of quietness, by a kind of being there, instead of having her thrust in front of everybody's noses, she will gain the respect. Time is a great healer. Time is enormously important in this. There's no need to rush it.
In the eyes of the Church, Camilla is still married. Remarriage to Prince Charles would raise religious and constitutional issues. Could she ever become queen?
I think it's interesting that when people say Charles should have married Camilla in the first place 30 years ago when he dithered and didn't marry her and she married Andrew Parker Bowles, we've got to remember that probably she was unsuitable then. She was not really a candidate for bride. A, she had a bit of a past. B, she wasn't really blue-blooded enough. So he could never really have married Camilla in the first place. Now he could. There's no need. He's got his heirs, which would have been the problem then. It doesn't have to marry a blue-blooded divorcee. For 30 years, she's shown that she is the main woman in his life. He's called her non-negotiable part of his life on whatever basis, married or not. So I think we'll see them moving towards marriage.
While the press produce fantasy photos of King Charles and Queen Camilla, the couple takes advice from government ministers about their future. Charles is reluctant to push the situation, fearing a crisis.
But I think that he's wrong, myself, to think that public opinion will continue, as Diana's death recedes into the background, to tolerate a future king really living in sin with somebody else's ex-wife, which is the situation at the moment. I think he wants to continue that way. I think she would want to get married more than him. But I don't think he can maintain that status quo.
Camilla, I think, is now permanently the mistress. She is now permanently behind the scenes. She will never become queen. She will never have a coronation. There will be always a ghost Queen Diana. By a deep paradox, Diana's death put her back into the royal family. And in a funny kind of way, she's queen from beyond the grave.
Some suspect that Camilla asked her friend Lucia Santa Cruz to help her have her marriage to a Roman Catholic annulled so that she would no longer have the stigma of divorce over her head. But even then, would Charles marry her?
I think it's because she's been so uncomplaining over the years that she's still there, she's still trucking on, you know. That's, people think, oh, this is the most enduring love affair. And I mean, it's availability, isn't it? I mean, sadly. She's there, it's all on a plate for him. Of course, she amuses him and entertains him, and they share great loves like horse riding and hunting and gardens and so on. But essentially, she's there.
Being accepted as the royal mistress in Charles's life may be as much as she can realistically hope for. Just as Diana's death was the ultimate tragedy, becoming Queen Camilla may be the ultimate fantasy.